Welcome back to another Death Knight card review. This time around, we're taking a look at some pretty silly blood cards. Kicking it off with the new legendary Deathbringer Sour Fang, 5 mana, 3/5 undead, double blood rune, taunt, and death rattle. Return this to your hand. It costs health instead of mana. So you plop this down on 5. Doesn't feel very good, honestly. It's kind of a bad Singe and Shield Master there to start. It dies off, and then you've basically got a free Sour Fang to play every single turn. Take your normal turn, spend your mana, and then hey, Sour Fang there if you want him. Comes down as well, just an extra defensive body. Maybe, just try to overwhelm your opponent with minions, turn the corner and start hitting them. But it doesn't matter if he gets cleared, he's coming back. So it's this infinite value resource that just comes at the cost of health. Now, is that cost of health going to be too high? We know that Blood Death Knights have some healing, some like health gain stuff to get to high health totals. We've got Renathal these days. And where's the sweet spot for how many times you can like safely play this turn after turn? And where's the sweet spot for how quickly it's just efficient enough to overwhelm your opponents? In other words, is that free, let's say this is kind of equivalent to like a 3 mana minion these days. I would argue as a 3/5 taunt, it definitely doesn't feel like a 4 mana minion like Singe and Shield Master. That just doesn't, this is not what we do in Hearthstone these days. So like how many times does a free 3 mana minion really like overwhelm your opponent? I don't think very soon. Like the amount of value here, the amount of disruption this offers on board, I don't personally feel like it's going to be high enough that even playing this 4 or 5 times has really netted you enough of advantage that it's worth losing 20 health, 25 health in the process. I just don't see how you're ever going to have enough healing or life manipulation to make that worth it. Now, there could be other cards that benefit from you losing health, things that like proc or trigger anytime you damage yourself, or something of that nature clearly could give this another reason to be played as opposed to just the body itself. I think it's really going to demand something like that to be worth it, because as it stands, I don't really think getting this free 3/5 every turn is worth the risk. There's a lot of lethality in Hearthstone, even with health manipulation, even with healing. I think you're just going to be exposing yourself to too much free damage. Eventually, like, okay, well, they played 3 Sour Fangs, they're just dead. My Denathrius will kill them very easily now, thanks to all those extra Sour Fangs they played, and the 3/5s on board just didn't really do that much, or didn't really make all that big of a swing. Now, maybe there's a world against specifically minion-based aggro decks where a 3/5 taunt a couple turns in a row just really shuts them down. I'm thinking about something like, we've got these aggro token druids right now that don't have a lot of reload. They don't have a lot of over-the-top reach, and it's really just about jostling for board and getting that board advantage. In that very specific matchup, I know how to speak English. Sour Fang might be quick enough. Like just maybe 2 or 3 of these, is enough, because you just have to win the board. You don't have to have health necessary if they don't have any of that over the top reach. That's it though. I think outside of that, I just don't see this card getting there. Maybe if the health manipulation gets an extra bonus somehow, get damage, get healing, get some kind of quest completion when you take damage, etc. In Demon Seed, for instance, you'd see why Sour Fang's really, really good, but there's no Demon Seed yet. And then maybe really hyper minion-based hyper aggro decks is it. And even then, I still think it's awfully risky, and it's gonna feel really bad to spend the first part of Sour Fang when you're gonna feel like there's so many other cool things you can do. So sometimes it's gonna be sitting there waiting till turn 6, turn 7. It's like, oh man, I really just play these board clears. Like, oh, do I finally have the extra 5 mana to play Sour Fang? Okay, sure. Let's go finally here on turn 7 or something. And it's just like, this card is just awkward. So to wrap that up, I think I would say Sour Fang is just a little bit too awkward and a lot too risky. Moving on here, we have the Corrupted Ashbringer, a 6 mana 5/2 weapon with lifesteal. And it's a common. This is one of the most iconic weapons in all of World of Warcraft. And, we had this precedent where things like Gorehowl and Doomhammer were epics back in the day when they first got released. And I was like, okay, that alone is weird. These kind of feel legendary, but I'll take it. They want us to run 2 of these in our deck. I'll accept that a iconic Warcraft lore weapon can be an epic, but a common? A common? I know this is just in regard to its simplicity. It's a very basic card. It's just simply stats and a single keyword, which that does indeed feel common, but maybe picking a different weapon for this effect or something would be fitting here. But Corrupted Ashbringer is a double Blood Rune card, and I gotta say, I just don't think this one's very exciting, and probably not very good either. Clearly, it's got some defensive utility here with lifesteal. This is kind of a heal 10. Maybe you could use that to clear up some minions, right? Kill a couple 5/5s and not lose any health in the process. But even for 6 mana, that feels a little inefficient and a big commitment in that regard. And a lot of boards just aren't shaped well for this kind of removal. Suddenly 3/3/3s is a lot scarier than 1/5/5. If it's 1/5/5 per turn, you're good to go, but just how often is that happening? And then of course you could maybe use this to go face and just get some chip damage, get a little healing back, but I don't think that's going to be very important for decks that care about going face. They'd rather just have things that are more aggressive as opposed to these that hedge with a little bit of defensive utility as well. It's not like you're going to try to outlast and outrace your opponent by gaining just a measly 5 health on a swing like this. So ultimately, I don't know who's using this or why they're using this or how this effect is good enough. Ashbringer to me just feels really flat and unfortunately really boring for one of the coolest weapons in all of Warcraft. Next up for Blood Death Knight, we have some hand buff stuff. They're getting hand buff cards. This 2 mana double Blood Rune shadow spell. Give all minions in your hand +1/+1 and spend 3 corpses to give them +1/+1 more. So we've already seen some of the copy your minions stuff in the Unholy Death Knight package in particular. And this is the sort of thing that supports those really, really well. For instance, we saw that 1/3 summon 2 copies of it. Now, if you give it +2/+2 and you summon 2 copies of it, that is suddenly summoning a bunch of 3/5 taunts. 4 mana summon 3/3/5 taunts. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. And in general, I think with Blood Death Knight, it looks to be like there's quite a bit of taunt focus. So a lot of these stats are going to have that immediate impact via big taunts on board, which can be nice to set up big defensive walls or just have things that are a little higher friction for your opponent to deal with while still presenting some threats on board as well. So between the swarms and sticky stuff in Unholy and maybe some of this hand buff stuff in Blood, you've got yourself a little combo there to set up some scary plays. Now, this is double Blood Rune, so you're not going to have access to everything necessarily, but there are still a few cards here and there that line up well. Now, outside of those specific minion copies, is this card good, generally speaking, as a hand buff? I think it's not the most efficient we've ever had. The 3 corpse commitment is pretty big to get the +2/+2 where this starts to feel really, really good. Because we had conditioning back in Warrior that would feel really good in the mid game. That's the one that went from 1/1 at turn 1, 2/2 at turn 5, and 3/3 at turn 10. You wouldn't usually want to wait till turn 10, but that sweet spot at turn 5 with the 2/2 felt nice. And Blood Tap is often going to be able to do that. But are you going to want to spend 3 corpses for that? If you're playing for a hand buff deck, are you trying to be more minion based, more aggressive? If so, is sacrificing 2 mana in the early game going to be worth it? Or is this going to come down too late because you do the corpses that you've missed your chance to kind of turn the corner on tempo stats? Is this, turn 5 hand buffing plays as significant as before? And without things like Divine Shield that have proven really useful for hand buffs and Paladin, is it going to be worth it? Because just taunts, they don't double up the effectiveness like a Divine Shield might, for instance. So all in all, there are a few gaps here to fill for hand buffs in Death Knight as far as I'm concerned. This has the makings of a good starter package. I think this could come together, but based on the cards we've seen so far, which I think is all the cards, I don't know that this is there yet. Next up here is the Vicious Bloodworm, another hand buff card, a 2 mana 3/2 single Unholy Rune. He's a beast because he's worm. And Battlecry, give a minion in your hand attack equal to this minion's attack. Now, the wording is a little bit confusing, but I think that actually means he's going to give +3 attack to whatever minion in hand. He's not going to set their attack to 3. The equal to is setting the number of the buff here. It's defining the number of the buff, not defining the outcome of the buff as I read this, although that is definitely a little bit confusing at first glance. And yes, this does benefit from you know, like doubling up, like if you hand buff this, its attack gets higher, so then that chains into, you know, a higher attack buff on the next thing. Maybe even get like 2 of these in a row, right? Like you buff this to 5, this one goes on board, that 5 hits the other one in hand that's already 5 that you've buffed up, and then that becomes a 10-2, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's all coming together. But I think that's still just a worse version of what Paladin was doing with their Dredge mech, the 2-mana 2/2 whose name I can't remember obviously right now because I don't remember any card names. That one did the same thing, but you get this upside of Dredge. You got to dredge a card out of your deck. That's really high value. And then you also got to pick the target off that Dredge, which means you know those stats are going to do something well. And the stats were all of its stats, not just its attack. So that card had both like more synergies, because this doesn't matter that it's a beast, probably that had mech synergies, had this Dredge upside to help you find the right card, and then pick your buff for it as well. Whereas the Vicious Bloodworm here to me seems like it's going to be far more inconsistent in hitting the correct or a valuable sort of target, and you also don't get the total stat line, just the attack. So I don't really see how the Bloodworm stacks up favorably compared to cards that have otherwise been pretty solid, but not like anything crazy either. To me, this one seems like it will fall short. And then we have one more big hand buff card here. This is the Dark Fallen Neophyte, a 3-mana single blood rune, 2/5 undead. Battlecry, spend 2 corpses to give all minions in your hand +2 attack. So I think a fairly low corpse commitment there, especially if you're using this as a splash in like a 2 unholy deck with 1 blood. You won't have any problems at all, I think, getting those 2 corpses in by turn 3, which means very often this is going to be a pretty big +2 attack on turn 3, and solid stat line to go with it too, of course, is a 2/5. That also means anytime this is absorbing any stray hand buffs, it's going to have some pretty nice stats. You know, occasionally it'll be like a 4/7 or something off your 2-mana spell, and that's a good shape for a minion, I think. And the fact that this hits all minions again is nice, unlike our beast guy that only hits 1 minion. I think this one looks good hitting everything for a really aggressive, swarmy style of play. I'm actually seeing this Blood Unholy hand buff combo coming together a little more nicely in my brain. I'm still not sure there's quite enough to make it all work well, but you're seeing some groundwork laid for sure. So yeah, this is the high output kind of hand buff card you need if this is going to work. I think this looks like one of the stronger hand buff options here. I still would prefer stat buffs over attack buffs, but since this is on a stick, I think that's still a really nice buff to get off of this one. Next up here, we have Asphyxiate, a 3-mana double blood rune shadow spell. This one allows you to destroy the highest attack enemy minion. So it's not targeted, but it is still, you know, influenced removal in this case. Not totally random like a deadly shot, but allows you to deal with potentially your opponent's most threatening minion, which often is the one you probably want to kill anyway. So this does in some ways feel like a 3-mana just kill the best thing of your opponents, but not always. Sometimes there are minions with like effects on board. They're more threatening that you'll wish that you could kill. You know, a 2/5 with some effect, and it's much better to kill often than a 3/2, for instance. So Asphyxiate might occasionally feel a little clunky. There will be other scenarios where they just have 1 minion on board, and you're just very happy to kill their 8/8 or their big Mutanus or whatever it might be. Asphyxiate will line up well. So I think this is absolutely fine removal. It's gonna feel efficient in some cases more often than it feels awkward, I think. Next up is the Hematurge, a 2-mana 2/3 double blood rune. Battlecry, spend a corpse to discover a blood rune card. So we had a very similar looking card for Unholy. That one had an undead synergy check, or an undead had to die after your last turn. This, I think, has a little bit of an easier check here with a single corpse required. So less conditional, maybe more from like a total resource commitment required, but less conditionality. I think it's gonna be easier to pull this off in most states. Also, I think for Blood Death Knights, you're more likely to value a card like this one. I think you'll care about the Hematurge more, because if you're a deck that's playing a grindier game, if you're going for more of a control game plan, you need resources, you need stuff to do, you need speed bump cards to play out and just kind of fill the board, make your opponent take a trade or two while you're getting towards your control game plan. And the Hematurge feels completely fitting and fine for that. Getting more powerful removal out of your blood set could be really nice for this one. So I think this actually fits pretty well into Blood Death Knights, where it might not necessarily fit as well into the other specializations for Death Knight. So next up is the Noxious Cadaver, a 1-mana 1/2 undead single blood rune. Battle Cry, deal 2 damage to an enemy and your hero. This card seems pretty nuts to me. It's 2 damage to an enemy that's targeted, so that can be, you know, take a little minion swing on board if needed, or just slam it to face. We've obviously had a few cards like this dealing 2 damage, going all the way back to SI7 Agent, of course. And this one as a 1/2 is really flexible. And the 2 damage to your hero, we presume, won't matter much at all in a Blood Death Knight world or in an aggro deck world. I don't think you have to be Blood specifically here, but if you're just trying to get a lot of damage, then the Cadaver here can help you do that really nicely while getting a minion down early. So you could probably play this on turn 1 just to get some tempo and not feel bad about it, because like, okay, I'm going to get my chip damage in. And certainly weaving this into a turn later when you had that 1 mana flexibility is going to feel really nice to help chip something away on board, or yet again, just get some damage to face. This actually feels like it lines up pretty nicely with some of the Frost cards we saw that were all about sending these little 2 damage pings at your opponent over time. Splash a single blood rune here, and the Noxious Cadaver could fit really nicely there. So I actually think this card is really, really, really strong for 1 mana. This is going to be in a lot of decks, I think, as a just big damage, good, flexible 1 mana card. So next up here we have Heart Strike. That dude's face is really funny. It's a 1 mana spell. It's a single blood rune. It deals 3 damage to a minion, and if that kills it, gain a corpse. So I like here that we're getting some cards where you can get corpses off of your opponent's deaths as opposed to just piling up corpses yourself. It's kind of nice to know that you can use removal and these reactive cards in, say, a control deck, for instance, and still get enough corpses to fuel your game plan. I was a little bit worried that some of these like Blood Knight game plans weren't gonna have the corpses or bodies necessary to fuel other cards. Heart Strike helps fix that as a really cheap, you know, this is basically a Holy Smite, right? Holy Smite here with a little bit of upside on the corpse side of things. I think that's fine. I think that's absolutely something your control deck might care to use. I'm a little bit worried about having enough cards in hand all the time for Blood Death Knight. We haven't seen a ton of like card draw or a ton of value generation for that deck. So can you throw away like little 1 mana spells like this? Can you weave them in easily without having that reload? That's a bit of a concern. They might need bigger, chunkier removal in particular to keep their hand nice and sizable and have a lot of good decision points. But if there are particularly, you know, really fast decks out there in the meta that are running things that have good break points here, you need to kill that 2/3 or that 3/2 early, because it's going to overwhelm you otherwise. Then Heart Strike certainly seems like a fine card to do that. So we've also got the Death Strike here. This is a 4 mana spell, single blood rune. It's got lifesteal and it's got deal 6 damage to a minion. So actually quite a bit of life gain on this one, healing 6 while removing something on board, and that's nice and swingy. This is basically 2 Drain Souls that have been stuck together, taped together into a single card. Now I will say I would rather have 2 Drain Souls because of that damage flexibility. This is a lot worse against 2 3/3s. That's an example I gave earlier with the Corrupted Ashbringer. Feels like the lifesteal package here for Death Knight is better at dealing with like bigger single target threats as opposed to wider boards. Now they have already gotten a few spells that are good at wider boards, so we might be seeing kind of a nice mix and match complementary set of cards here. So maybe you won't need some of these single target removals to be quite as flexible or good against smaller threats. Because as it stands now, you know, you don't want to kill a 3/3 with a 4 mana card, probably, even with a little bit of bonus healing. That's just gonna feel awkward. It's gonna feel like I'm spending my entire turn, or, you know, a large percentage of my turn just dealing with a single minion. I really wish this had a little bit more flexibility so I could do more. So I suspect there would be more favorable breakpoints for this, like a 3 mana deal 4, or God, why not even a deal 5? Like, come on. A 3 mana deal 5 would probably feel a lot better than a 4 mana deal 6, for instance. And probably 2 mana deal 3, like Drain Soul, honestly might feel better here for the Death Strike. As it stands at 4 mana, I'm sure this will still get played a little. I think there will be some control Blood Knights, and they need these cards. They just have to have cards to play, and this is going to be one of the more fitting ones. But I don't think it's going to be the card you're most excited to play. It's going to feel awkward sometimes. It's going to feel dead at hand a lot. So this will be near the bottom of the list. As Death Knight gets access to more and more cards, this is the sort of thing I think could be cut, but is absolutely fine for now. It's okay, just not super powerful. And then next up here we have the Soul Breaker, a 3 mana 3/2 weapon. Fiery War Axe has gotten murdered over and over again. After your hero attacks and kills a minion, gain 2 corpses. This is another way to fuel your corpses while playing defensively. So using this Fireworks here, clean up a couple bodies and get 4 corpses in total. And you know what? I actually think that's going to be really solid. You're going to need ways to spin corpses in Blood Death Knight, and this looks like one of the best early game ways to really do that. This is good at tidying up those 3/3s we've talked about, finally helping you keep up against that early pressure from your opponent while still advancing your corpse game plan for the power plays coming along later in the game. I think that's going to be a real recipe for success, and the Soulbreaker is going to fit really, really nicely into this deck. So this card looks pretty good. Now, we also got a few Death Knight cards here that are a part of the March of the Lich King expansion. I'm still going to be a stickler and do the full review for these later, but of course, I wanted to show you guys the cards. So stay tuned for the next March of the Lich King review. Whenever we get some other non-Death Knight March of the Lich King cards, I'll put these in, do a quick spiel, and give them their final quick review score. But for now, this is Alexandros Mograine, a 7-mana 7/7 undead minion. Triple blood rune here. Now, I did notice that when they revealed this on Twitter that he was a 3/7, but on the website he's a 7/7. So he must have gotten buffed somewhere along the way from a 3/7 to a 7/7, which I think is probably a good thing. The battle cry here reads, for the rest of the game, deal 3 damage to your opponent at the end of your turns. So this is the win condition of sorts, I think, for a really grindy, defensive, control-oriented Blood Death Knight. You've got this damage over time effect that eventually you hope will whittle down your opponent while you're just staying alive, doing your thing, removing plays, healing a lot, and then Mograine's just doing work in the background, chipping them away every turn. And then maybe in combination with, 3 or 4 turns of chip damage, you finally, you stick a little board and that's enough to kill them. Or maybe he just sets you up for your Denathrius, more likely, because Denathrius seems like he'll just be in every deck yet again. Yeah, maybe not triple blood. They may not have enough minions for Denathrius, but there you go. You're going to have to race against your opponent's Denathrius, so good luck with 3 damage per turn when Denathrius is hitting you for 30. I don't know how that's going to go. But that really sums up the challenge with this card, right? It takes a long time for this to potentially make an impact, because 3 damage immediately is not often going to be enough. Rarely is not going to be the killing blow. And then is 6 damage enough? No, 9 damage. When does this start to become important? Because it doesn't do anything until it kills them, right? It's pointless until they're dead. So it takes maybe 3 turns, 4 turns, 5 turns, 6 turns before this does enough work that it actually had an impact. And you're only getting a 7-mana 7/7 in the meantime. So you're kind of passing a turn in a lot of cases here with Mograine. And I feel like so many other decks have a ton of ways to kill you really quickly. They're going to just absolutely swarm you and overwhelm you and Denathrius you while you're waiting for your Mograine to actually have made an impact. So for me, I think this is going to take too long. This is like the epitome of slow cards. Now, I'm gonna tell you something. I love this card. I think this card looks awesome. The character's insane. I love the idea of a damage over time effect. I wish that this was going to work well. I love the idea of like long, grindy attrition style games like this, but I think that's fairly unrealistic. And if they are, they're probably going to be against something like Priest or Warlock that can really easily negate the damage output here. These like slow little ticks of chunk damage don't really add up fast enough to be lethal. They're just gonna like, okay, I'll heal 2. Okay, whatever. I'm taking 1 damage per turn now. Fine. My hero power is basically negating this as a priest. Like, okay. So do you double this up with Brand so they take 6 per turn? That means you're losing 3 turns on the Mograine already, or 4 turns, 7, 8, 9, 10, 3 turns. You're losing 3 turns, so it's like, man, it takes a long time for Brand to be worth it, and then you're spending 10 mana to do nothing, just to deal 6 per turn. I don't know where you go with this. I don't know how this actually gets there. It just feels like it's gonna take 1,000 years, and Hearthstone is too fast for that. So I'm sad to say I just do not think Alexandros Mograine here makes much sense at all, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's a way this actually makes sense and works, because he's such a cool looking character. This artwork looks insane. Like, I would love for this card to be good. I'm just not seeing it. And I realized that these aren't supposed to be real reviews, but I just talked for like 5 minutes about one card. So we're going to go faster on these other 2 March of the Lich King cards. This is Soul Stealer, an 8-mana 5/5 triple blood rune. This is insane. Battle Cry, destroy all other minions. So this is a Twisting Nether effect with a body, and gain 1 corpse for each enemy destroyed. So another way to get corpses off your opponent's stuff, and just a really good board clear here that goes ahead and gives you the minion as well. So Twisting Nether with a body and with additional upside, that looks great. Twisting Nether's still kind of relevant card. There are certainly moments against like big relic boards and big druid boards where Twisting Nether fits nicely, and I think Soul Stealer could absolutely fit nicely as well. You don't have to get a lot of minions out of this one to feel good since you're getting a 5/5 for it. So all in all, looks really strong. Maybe a reason to run triple blood Death Knight. And then also we have the Bone Guard Commander, an 8 mana 8/8 single blood rune taunt, and Battlecry raise up to 6 corpses as 1/2 Risen Footman with taunt. Remember, Risen minions will not give you more corpses, so you are spending 6 here to get yourself a really annoying little board, like a little spreading plague of 1/2s. Now, that said, I think the 1/2 is the reason this card's going to have a hard time. It's just, there's a lot of things that deal so easily with 1/2s, so they don't really pack a punch as a threat on board often. I think the opponent will just be able to tidy those up really nicely before you get like a chance to buff them or utilize them in some way to create counter pressure. So then you're saying, okay, well, this is a defensive wall sort of card, right? I'm going to play this against a minion based aggro deck. We're going to plop this down against those aggro druids. But for that one, I think 8 mana is coming along a little too late. It may not really make as much impact. It might feel like you've already stabilized or you've already lost by the time the Bone Guard Commander would make an impact. So I don't know, man. It feels like it's stuck a little bit in the middle here. A little cheaper with a little fewer minions might be a better game plan, or more threatening minions if you're going to use this as a counter pressure threat late might be nice as well. But as it stands right now, I don't know that this makes quite enough stuff or is disruptive enough. It is an 8 mana 8/8 taunt at base, so it's not like that's terrible. I like the way that staggers itself. You got small and big in one board, which could be awkward, but again, at 8 mana, there's a lot of ways for opponents to have found answers and found time or solutions to this kind of problem. So I don't think the Bone Guard Commander is going to come down quite soon enough to make the impact it needs. Deathbringer Sourfang is a 3-star card. Corrupted Ashbringer is a 2-star card. Blood Tap is a 3-star card. Asphyxiate's a 3-star card. Hematurge is a 3-star card. Dusk Fallen Neophyte is a 4-star card. Vicious Bloodworm's a 2-star card. Noxious Cadaver is a 5-star card. Heartstrike is a 3-star card. Deathstrike is a 3-star card. Soulbreaker is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for the Death Knight reviews. I gotta say, the blood stuff seemed a little less good to me here. This seemed like the weakest of the 3 big reviews we've had. I mean, maybe it's gonna come together on synergies. Sometimes hard to see that stuff, but individually the cards didn't really seem to do quite as crazy things as we've seen with some of the other ones in the past. So that said, curious to your thoughts. Did I get it wrong? Are these absolutely nuts? Is Sourfang going to be in every deck? I want to hear those takes and more in the comments below. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.